Hi,
Hi,
Anna. How are you?
how are you?
So I have just had to enable attendees to be able to enter. I hope that's all right with you. And I'm just going to enable Pauline to join us as well and make sure that's all good.
Hello.
Hi,
Anna.
Pauline. How are you? How are
I'm
you?
okay. How are you? Hi, Jennifer.
Good. I'm just trying to make sure that attendees are entering and able to enter. So what I have done for this session is that we have the Q&A open, and that Pauline, you and I should be able to keep an eye on that, just to keep an eye if there's any questions that come in, just anything, that we can kind of keep track of. And I'm sure you're going to do your presentation, and, if we have time for questions, that'd be great. If we don't, that's totally fine, but it's always nice, I think, to get a gauge of kind of where people's thoughts are at as well. We do have the webinar chat enabled to allow people to message the hosts and the panelists if there's any kind of technological issue. Sometimes I think that's kind of handy just to have in case there's a dip or anything like that in that instance. But otherwise, we are going to keep the attendees muted, and you will be our speaker. And I'm just making sure I've definitely made you a panelist. And
Brilliant.
Perfect. There we go. And I'm going to just spotlight your screen as well. I also have recording enabled, just so it can go onto the cloud automatically, rather than us kind of having to think about it halfway through or end it at a certain time or things like that. I've done that in the past and can be a little bit chaotic. But that should be all good to go. But once you get started, Pauline and myself will probably turn off our cameras and kind of mute ourselves, just to stay in the background, keep an eye if there's any questions or anything like that. But depending on the length of your presentation and how things are going, you can let us know if you have time to answer questions in the end or anything like that. If you don't, that's no problem. And, depending, I suppose, on the content of what comes in. But I thought it was best that we kind of open it up to attendees now, just to let people kind of trickle in and things, because there's usually one or two emails of people, wondering how to access something or needing the link or things like that. So we'll just let that build up there for the next few minutes before we get started.
Do you want to try and share? Do you want to share your screen, Anna, just to make sure that it's sharing okay? Or
yeah, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Perfect. I'll just change that now. Let me just edit that here. So I'm going to make you a co-host as well as a panelist. So that should allow you to do it. I'm going to make you a co-host as well, Pauline, just in case something mysterious happens and we all need all hands on deck, Do you have the share screen option now, Anna?
Yes.
Okay, it's come up for you. Good. Okay.
Warm this up now.
Perfect. And before we get started at past, I might just do a little introduction to As I Am, what we do. I suppose the program as well, and just to give a bit of context and everything like that. But otherwise, we should be all good to go once you're able to share your screen and that's working.
Thanks. Okay.
Oh, perfect.
And that's working okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant. So I might actually just move it onto this first screen here. And then as people are coming in, if they want to contribute to this Mentimeter, they can just go to menti.com and use this code at the top.
I love Mentimeter.
Yeah,
I do as well. I do as well.
Brilliant. I love it especially when we're interacting virtually. I think it's such a nice way of being able to interact in a way that maybe in person I've certainly taken for granted in the past.
Absolutely. It's nice also to have kind of real-time thoughts. And I think maybe when you're autistic as well, sometimes I can find it hard to verbalize what I mean in the moment, whereas I can be better when I have to type it, or there's less pressure, I suppose, to verbalize it. So it's kind of
Yes.
nice to give everyone that option.
Absolutely. And hopefully this should then, let's say results are hidden. Let's see if I can update that. Okay, so it should ideally in real time be updating
Okay.
with this.
Excellent.
Not.
Okay, so there's just a good few people coming in there in the last minute or two. So I might open Menti myself and just make sure I have it.
Perfect.
I'm on the button with Menti. I have the code typed in and all.
Perfect.
Okay.
Fair play to you, Polly. Dead right.
Ready to go.
1, 6, 3, 6. Excellent. Oh yeah, there we go. You know, maybe this is one of the benefits of being, I suppose, staff member with As I Am, is getting to kind of sit and learn from these kind of things as well as take part. So it's always
Yeah,
it's always a
absolutely.
nice privilege, really.
Mhm.
So I suppose as it's past, and I'm sure, you know, some people might come in later, anything like that. And I might just give a little bit of background about, you know, how this webinar came to be, but also our adult support program and department in general. I'll keep it super brief and super short and snappy, but just in case anyone who is checking in or anything like that maybe hasn't engaged with the adult program before and would like to know who to email, where to go, that kind of thing. So essentially, my name is Jen, and I am the Adult Support and Wellbeing Officer here with As I Am. And that essentially is part of the Adult Support and Employment Department, which I suppose at its core, what we do is advocate for autistic adults across Ireland in different settings, whether it's workplace settings, social settings, accessing higher education. It's kind of, I suppose, taking on board that there's huge variety in what autistic adults are trying to do and achieve, and the potential that we can achieve, really. I personally, looking over the wellbeing program, and Pauline has been an amazing coordinator and help with this for the last got a few months now, actually, isn't it? Which is crazy. We run different peer support groups for men and women, as well as activity groups in terms of mindfulness. You know, maybe a little bit of there's yoga, there's art, there's Minecraft groups. Essentially, just ways for autistic adults to connect. The program itself came around during the pandemic when, I don't know about everyone else, of course, but I was struggling definitely with kind of that isolation and kind of break of routine as well. It was really hard. So the programs actually originally came around that way. So we do offer employment support groups. We offer different kind of access to resources. Peer support generally is something that I know Pauline and I are really big on doing as well, because I think we can achieve so much more when we're together as a community. So just, if anyone is looking to reach out or would like to hear more about it, you can email us at adultgroups@asiam.ie. And you can reach out to us and ask any queries or anything like that. We'll either direct you into, you know, someone who knows more, or different resource banks, or we'll help you directly ourselves if we can. But part of what we do is, I suppose, trying to have information sessions where possible for the autistic community around different areas that we've received feedback from the community that they'd like to hear about. And I know personally, time awareness is a big one for myself anyway. So this wasn't a surprise, but it's something, a theme that comes up regularly in our peer support groups. So we're so delighted to have Anna here, and delighted to hear everything you have to say. Anna, I might just actually let you know that we have a question here that's just asking for someone who's trying to set up Menti to answer this, if you could explain the question a bit better, or what do you mean by challenges with time?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I suppose I often will kind of open up that question back to you of how does that feel relevant to you? So for me, I might take it as challenges in terms of, is there something when I think about my time, think about how I'm spending it currently? Is there something that's causing me stress, something that I'm struggling with, something that is kind of creating a sense of challenge for me? But it can really be kind of open to your interpretation there.
Where's someone there? Who's going?
Okay, that's excellent. It's just I think it's probably good to have a bit of clarity on that from the get-go, really, as well.
Yeah.
I would just say, just before I hand you over to Anna fully there, just to say that myself and Pauline are going to be here as moderators in the background, hopefully very unobtrusive moderators. And we're going to just keep an eye out and see if there's any questions. We're hopefully going to have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions at the end, depending on time. So if questions do come in and they're not answered in real time, that's only because we don't want to stop the flow of, you know, Anna's presentation and everything that she has to say and get across, but those questions are seen, absolutely. The chat is also enabled for you to be able to message us as hosts, just in case you're having any technical issues or anything like that. So feel free to use that if there's any kind of issue that comes up. But other than that, I will hand you over to Anna and disappear and fade into the background.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here with you this evening, and really curious to see what questions come up, what resonates with you, what's useful. So please do feel free to continue to use the chat and the Q&A throughout the presentation. And then I'm hoping it's funny to me whenever I'm giving a presentation on time, how often time comes into play with it. But hopefully my goal here is that we will have time to have a bit of a Q&A and discussion at the end. So please, yeah, feel free to contribute any questions that you might have, and hopefully we'll have time to get to those. And thank you to everybody who's contributing now to the Menti. If anybody is not familiar with Menti, if you go up to the either the QR code here on the screen, or if you go to menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen, 53817636, you can then add in any thoughts that you have around your biggest challenges with time right now. And we might kind of give a couple minutes to continue to fill this out, and we'll come back to it as we're talking. There's definitely quite a few on here that I resonate with. Procrastinating, changing to routine, unwinding after work, having enough energy. Yeah, so thank you. Please feel free to continue to contribute to this. And for the sake of time, I'm going to keep going. But again, we'll try to circle back to this. Okay. Let's see here if I can move my slides forward. There we go. So just as we start off, I want to give just a little bit of an introduction to who I am. So my name is Anna Neven-Young. I am a coaching psychologist, a researcher, and an educator. And my main areas of interest are looking at time awareness and time wellness. So thinking about how we think about our time, how we spend our time, how we value our time, and how that influences the decisions that we're making, how that influences our daily routines, and how that then has impacts on our health and our well-being and our happiness throughout our lives. And particularly, I'm interested in also looking at how our culture, our society, our community has different impacts on our relationship with time. And we'll talk a little bit about that for the first part of this webinar. So that's just a little bit about me. I do a couple different things in this area. So as a coaching psychologist, I practice and I work individually with clients and with groups really focused on time awareness and spending intentional time on goal setting and pursuing self-reflection, self-awareness, and then kind of using that to intentionally set goals and pursue goals in life, in relationships, in work. And then I also lecture part-time in University College Cork down in Cork. And I contribute to the Masters in Positive and Coaching Psychology, as well as some of the other applied psychology programs here at UCC. So time awareness is, again, I kind of said this, but understanding our relationship with time and how that influences our perspectives of ourselves, perspective of the world, how it impacts our health and our well-being and our decision-making. And then looking at how our culture and our society influence the time habits that we have, what we see as a good use of time, how it influences the routines and the schedules that we have in our day-to-day lives. And then paying attention to how building an awareness of these different factors can help us to navigate them more intentionally. So we're making intentional choices, about our time and how we want to use it well and use it in ways that feel important to us. But what do I mean when I say time? This is something that is, I suppose, could take us down a lot of different rabbit holes. But I think it's important to consider what we're defining time as. And this is one of my favorite quotes to bring up, especially when kind of introducing this. So what then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it to one who asks, I know not. And there's a lot of different ways that time can be defined. So we can look at time in terms of biological time. So this would include our internal timekeeping mechanisms, such as our circadian rhythms, which are influencing our sleep-wake cycles, and kind of the natural biological cycles that occur as a form of time. We can consider time as nature time. So these are rhythms of the natural world. These could be daylight cycles, for example, different seasons that we go through. Event time is the rhythm of activities or happenings. So the event begins when it feels right, and the event ends when it feels right. The event begins when we arrive to the location, and it ends when we decide to leave the location. And then there's clock time. And clock time is really defining and navigating time as something that can be measured, as something that's objective. And typically there's some sort of timepiece like a watch or a clock that is being used to keep time and to dictate the time. So for example, we are using clock time to say that this webinar is from 6:30 to 7:30 today. And I suppose when we think about the dominant way in which we think about time on a larger societal scale, right now, clock time is the dominant temporality. So that's typically how we're expected to be navigating our time, to be thinking about our time. When we schedule something, it's typically using clock time to determine when it is that activity or event is happening. We think about different roles that we hold in terms of clock time. So different roles could be our work. For example, we have typical clock time hours where we're considering those as typical work time hours versus typical leisure hours. So 9 to 5 work days versus weekends, for example. And as we think about that, I think it's important to consider what it potentially means to have a dominant temporality. So the dominant temporality tends to set the tempos and the paces of life, set different expectations around how we're expected to navigate our time, expectations that can then be met or maybe not met in some cases. And thinking about today's dominant temporality with that focus on clock time, the research is really looking at the different nuances of that. So that focus on clock time typically means, especially with technological advances, that we are expected to have a polychronic time use, which basically means that we're doing multiple things at once, or we're juggling a lot of different things that require our time and our attention, rather than a monochronic time use, where we're able to focus a bit more on individual tasks and activities and really put our attention into a specific task, one at a time. And this dominant temporality is also really focused on time as something that relates to productivity, or a sense of productivity, in the idea that time can be optimized, that it's something that can either be used well or can be wasted. And we have different expectations then, or different values of what it means to use time well, or what it means to waste time. And those are also kind of defined by the larger communities and systems that we're working within. And then finally, we, especially because we're considering time as clock time most of the time, we see it as something that is objective, something that can be standardized, the expectation that we're working a 9 to 5 job, the idea that we all should be or could be working the same amount of time, that it's something that is a bit inflexible and tends to take more of a neurotypical expectation in how we're using time, how we're using attention and focus. And this can have some consequences that are being more and more widely researched. And we see, I guess, the far-reaching impacts of this faster and faster pace that we're going at, and this rigidity that can sometimes come up when we are really focused on clock time, rather than maybe focusing on some of these other ways of defining and being with time. So some of the consequences that we're seeing in the research have to do with social expectations of timeliness, time poverty, which is also referred to as time pressure. And we'll kind of talk about all of these in more detail in a second. We also see a lot of productivity pressure in how we're using our time. And again, what's seen as optimizing our time versus wasting our time. We see consequences involving overchoice and opportunity cost, time confetti, and a lack of flexibility and a lack of consideration for individual differences and individual preferences in our relationship with time. So social expectations of timeliness. These create, I suppose, a common language of time that we see in our daily lives. So these social expectations that are set might help us to define or determine what's considered early, what's considered on time, what's considered late, and what these things signify. So lateness, for example, is with this dominant temporality, does lateness signify something? In some cultures, in some societies, it doesn't quite as much. And that's typically where event time holds a bit more focus. So the exact clock time that might say that somebody is late, maybe doesn't have as much prominence in a culture or society. So there's a social psychologist called Robert Levine, and he wrote a book called The Geography of Time. And he was a social psychology professor from the United States. He went to Brazil for a period of time to teach at a university down there. And he tells the story of arriving and going to meet with his head of school. They had set a specific time, let's say 10 a.m., that their meeting is scheduled for. And he arrives and nobody's in the office. So he waits and he waits and he waits. And about an hour goes by and the head of school's assistant comes in and says, "Oh yeah, don't worry, he'll be here soon." Waits and waits and waits. Another hour goes by. Eventually the head of school comes in, acts as if nothing is wrong and says, "Oh, this is great. I have a couple of minutes and I have somebody else who I'm meeting with as well now." So all of a sudden it's the three of them meeting, and Robert Levine is completely flustered, confused, unsure why they aren't talking about the fact that the meeting is 2 hours late now. But he says, okay, maybe this is just a fluke. It's okay. And he goes on to teach his first lecture. He arrives to the lecture hall, is ready for the scheduled start time of the lecture. And he has, some of his students are there ready to go. So he begins the lecture. And as he's talking, more and more students are trickling in throughout the lecture, up until maybe half an hour to the end of the lecture. So he's a little confused, unsure if they're just coming in late, if maybe it's the beginning of the semester, and decides, okay, it's okay, we'll just keep going with the lecture. He finishes off at the allotted time, and rather than the students packing up their stuff and leaving right away, he finds that they're actually still continuing with the conversation, asking questions, chatting. They're in no rush to get off to their next thing. And so slowly, as the conversation kind of finishes up, they start to get up and leave. And again, he's a bit confused, unsure. This is different from his other experiences of lecturing and meetings. And as he goes on, this ends up becoming this big area of research for him, looking at the social implications of time and how we create these norms in how we spend our time, where he's coming from a culture and a society where clock time is very dominant and dictating what time a meeting starts, what time a class ends, and that is determining when they start the conversation, when they end the conversation. And having this experience of teaching in a culture where event time was more prominent, he realized that, clock time isn't the only way of dictating or determining how I navigate time. And actually it could be, we're still having this conversation. So even if it maybe goes clock time past the expected time, that's okay. Maybe if somebody's having a conversation or having lunch with a friend before class, and that means that they don't come in, and maybe they're half an hour late in event time, that's not seen as an issue necessarily, because they're leaving lunch when it feels right, when the lunch is finished up. and then they're arriving to class after that. So I think it's interesting to think about that story and to spend a little bit of time on that, because it sometimes deviates from what we're used to in considering clock time, and considering what lateness means, where I've grown up to kind of see, oh, lateness means maybe it's disrespectful to the other person, or maybe it's a bit dismissive of whatever the meeting might be. And just paying attention to what are the social norms that have been created around these ideas of lateness or earliness, or what it means to be on time. There's also social expectations around who's allowed to be late. So maybe a boss is allowed to be late to a meeting, but an employee isn't, and there might be some power dynamics at play there. Looking at social expectations in terms of typical work hours. So I was saying that before, in terms of what do we consider work time hours versus non-work time hours? Are weekends typically considered non-work time? And different ways that we look at structuring or orienting ourselves in time, based on the dominant norms here. And then there's also an expectation that everybody is operating on the same or similar clock time orientation, so that we all kind of understand, if we say the webinar starts at 5:30, we all know what that means, and we're able to orient ourselves to that, so we're all arriving here at the same time. One of the other consequences that has really come up through a dominant temporality that focuses quite a bit on clock time, focuses quite a bit on time as productivity, is a widespread sense of time poverty. And you might have also heard this being called time scarcity, time pressure, time urgency, or time stress. It all generally means the same thing. And that is a perception that the amount of time that we have for everything that we need to do and everything that we want to do is basically they're in discrepancy with how much time we actually need. So the amount of time we have isn't enough for everything that we need and want to do. The opposite of that then is a sense of time affluence, which is a sense that we typically have enough time for everything that we need and want to do. And what we see is that there's quite a few different impacts of having that sense of time poverty, that feeling of not having enough time. And it tends to create this, what has been called in the literature, hurry sickness, where it's actually impacting our health and our mental health and our happiness and well-being, because we feel that we're constantly rushing and rushing and rushing. And it can then be harder sometimes to really feel present in the moment, to really savor experiences and feel gratitude for things. It can also impact our eating habits if we feel that we don't have enough time to prepare healthy food, our exercise habits if we feel we don't have enough time to exercise. It can impact our overall psychological health and physical health, our creativity and productivity, as well as job satisfaction and performance. It can really impact all sorts of daily habits and behaviors. If, again, we're feeling like we're rushing and rushing and rushing, we maybe don't feel as present in our relationships, as present in the conversations that we're having. We don't necessarily feel that we can spend a lot of time caring for ourselves, resting, and it creates a real challenge sometimes then in being able to structure our time and feel that we're accomplishing what we want to be accomplishing and using our time in ways that feel well. We also then see a sense of opportunity cost and overchoice that can come from the dominant temporality that we are often experiencing. And this opportunity cost comes from this sense that any time that we spend on one thing is time that we're then not able to spend on something else. And that can create this sense then that we always have to make the right choice with how we're using our time. It can create a bit of productivity pressure, feeling that we always have to be productive with our time. Every minute needs to be accounted for properly. We have to be very strict about trying to optimize our time because there's always something better we could be doing. If we're wasting time, there's so many other things we could be spending it on. And that can create quite a bit of pressure. And then overchoice is, I think, very connected to that in some ways, which is a sense that because we have so many different options, it can become overwhelming, feeling that there's too many things that we could or should be doing with our time. And so making any decision on how we're actually going to use that time becomes challenging, becomes overwhelming. And I like to use the example of scrolling on Netflix to try to figure out something to watch. So the amount of time that can be spent looking at our different options, considering, am I in the mood for comedy? Am I in the mood for drama? Maybe I should actually just go read instead. Suddenly we have all these different options, and it becomes fatiguing in some cases to constantly have to try to sift through everything and try to make a decision. And that's where the opportunity cost can kind of come in. Well, if I choose to watch this, that means I'm not watching this other thing, or I'm choosing not to read, or maybe I could be spending my time better. I could just go to sleep and maybe that would be more relaxing. Maybe I would get more sleep in. So it creates a narrative of, I suppose, pressure around our decisions. And this then can lead to what researchers call time confetti, which is, I suppose it's contributed to because of technology in a lot of ways, but it's where our attention and our time becomes fragmented across a lot of different smaller tasks and activities. And this can also be considered time deepening in some ways, where we want to do a lot of different things at once because we feel that there's so much to do and we want to try to keep up with everything. So this can create time traps where we're doing one thing. So maybe we have an hour of leisure time, but we're doing the leisure, but we're thinking about something else. So maybe we're thinking about work. Our attention is being kind of fragmented across different things. So you can see in this figure here, which is from Ashley Willen's book, Time Smart, that hour of leisure time. Maybe we spend 30 seconds on Twitter and then a minute responding to an email. And then we have a couple text messages that we respond to. And then there's an alarm that goes off and so on and so forth. So that hour of free time is then being broken down by different distractions, by different pulls of our attention from one thing to another. And often that can lead to a feeling of disorientatedness, a feeling that we haven't really accomplished too much in that time, or it's not as satisfying maybe as it could be. It can also kind of increase a feeling of guilt or stress, again, with the sense that there are so many other things that we could be doing or should be doing, and a sense of I'm never doing enough, potentially. We see this with what's called like an ideal worker and an ideal parent, where we have this sense of comparison that's happening. So if I'm spending time with the kids, there's a sense of guilt that I'm not spending more time working. If I'm spending time working, there's a sense of guilt that I'm not spending more time with the kids. And there's this comparison with, well, the ideal worker spends more time working. The ideal parent spends more time parenting. And we're constantly then comparing to an ideal that's really unattainable, rather than feeling satisfied and present in the time that we do have and the activities that we are doing with that time. So if you want to read more on that, there's a few links that I've provided throughout the slides. And I believe we'll be sharing the slides with you afterwards. So you're more than welcome then to look into these more. So I suppose I wanted to take time considering these different concepts, really breaking down clock time and considering it a bit more in terms of the dominant role that it plays in a lot of expectations that are created and set in our society. Considering some of the consequences or impacts that we see based on the dominant temporalities, thinking about how we have all these different options, how we have this sense of trying to optimize time, keeping up with the fast-paced world, so on and so forth. And then considering time blindness, which is something that everybody can experience to some degree, but for people in the autistic community, people who have ADHD, people who are maybe neurodiverse in different ways, tend to experience to a higher capacity in some cases, and how this can then, I think, add additional pressure or an additional factor to navigating the dominant temporalities that we see and that we face in our everyday world. So time blindness is an inability to accurately measure time or to kind of keep track of the passing of time. This can often impact effective time management. So common experiences of time blindness can include losing track of time due to distractions, losing track of time during transitions. It might also include being late to meetings or events. Again, this is really focused on late with a sense of a clock time orientation, misjudging how long a task is going to take, struggling to plan in advance, procrastination, and difficulty keeping things organized in work or in life. And I suppose one of the big things that I'm seeing happen in the time literature that I'm really focused on with my private client work is really understanding what we consider time management or productivity. Again, what is our relationship with time? And moving away from a sense of optimizing time and productivity and performance, and really understanding where we as humans exist in a much broader reality of time. And even though we're living in a society that really emphasizes clock time and emphasizes expectations surrounding clock time, it's okay and normal and natural that we often don't always exist in that clock time as strictly and as objectively as is maybe expected. Because again, I think that expectation is an unrealistic expectation. And kind of loses the flexibility and doesn't consider the individual differences and preferences that we have in our relationship with time. So one of the newer definitions of time management that I'm seeing come through in the time research is looking at the time management as the ability to structure, defend, and optimize your time so that your schedule becomes a reflection of your values, your beliefs, and your philosophy. So although time management can lead to productivity, it has a much stronger impact on well-being, mental health, and having a sense of purpose in life. And this is coming through in research that's basically showing that in some cases, time management can have impacts on productivity and performance. What they're actually seeing, and this has surprised a lot of researchers, is actually it has a much stronger impact on a sense of well-being and a sense of purpose, especially when it's being used in connection with a sense of what do I value, what's important to me, and how is that translating to the ways that I'm spending my time, my mindset around time, the ways I'm thinking about my time. And so I suppose some of the takeaways that I have for today are really inviting you to spend some time thinking about your time, understanding your preferences and your relationship with time, thinking about maybe some of the things that I've opened up and talked about in terms of what is your relationship to clock time specifically? Have you had experiences of time confetti? Have you had experiences of lateness or, different challenges there that maybe relate back to the dominant temporality that we're living in? And what are some of the ways that with your relationship with time, how can you kind of recreate your time in a way that's going to work well for you? So through that, identifying different desired areas of change, establishing foundational values, practicing self-compassion, creating systems and routines that are going to support you, using clocks to your advantage, and using technology to your advantage. And again, we're going to kind of talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. So understanding what works well for you, what supports you to use your time well and in the ways that you want to. So thinking about that definition of time management, where we are creating structures that are going to help us to use time in a way that's connected to our values, that is going to allow us to use time in ways that feel important to us. So spending time kind of reflecting on that and thinking about what does that look like feasibly in your daily life. Using boundaries and saying no to activities that you don't want to spend time on. So understanding that time is finite, and that means that we do have to make those different decisions around what we are spending time on, what we aren't spending time on, and how those decisions or those boundaries can be intentional, and they can kind of connect back to what feels important to us. And then what routines are going to support you to use your time well and in the ways that you want to. Is it creating routines or systems for planning ahead, creating daily habits that you can create and then repeat every day, breaking up larger tasks into smaller steps that are then easier to plan for, easier to execute. And we'll talk about those in a bit more detail in a second there. But really, I suppose that's kind of the biggest thing that I would emphasize is just considering what are your personal preferences, what works well for you, and what's important to you in terms of what you're spending your time on, and how can that then be connected to some of these strategies that we're talking about. Through that, identifying potential areas of desired change. So if we are thinking about, okay, what's important to you, how do you want to be using your time? Are there specific areas of your life that are maybe impacted by time blindness, or in other ways feel like time is a bit of a challenge? Maybe there's a feeling of time pressure that's coming up in your entire life or in a specific area of your life. And that could be an area for specific focus in terms of making some changes. And thinking about what are the impacts that are potentially occurring in this area of your life. So there might be practical impacts. Maybe it's that you're often arriving late to meetings or to important events, that you're missing buses or transportation. It could be that maybe you're often spending hours watching TV or gaming or on social media. And that's kind of the practical what's happening with your time. And maybe that's a bit more clock time focused. Well-being. So when this is happening, what is occurring on a well-being front? So does this increase your stress? Is it creating frustration or friction in this area of your life? And then health-wise, is it having any type of health impact? So is it leading to sleep deprivation? Is the stress that it's causing leading to the sleep deprivation, or maybe not eating healthy or feeling more irritable, or anything like that? So considering, I suppose, the breakdown of what impact is this having, so that we have a fuller landscape of why this matters to you. From there, I like to recommend establishing some of your foundational values or your why. So if we're considering what's important to you, how you want to be spending your time, and we're considering maybe potential areas where you feel that time is a struggle for you, and it's having different detrimental impacts on your life, and that's an area where you want to make a change, really establishing why you want to make that change. So if you're often arriving late to meetings or events, maybe the why is a sense of, I want to respect others and I want to respect my own time. And I feel that arriving on time is a display of respect to myself and to the others that I'm meeting. Or maybe it's a value of self-care, of taking care of yourself, and feeling that making a change and limiting screen time, for example, to prioritize a full night of sleep is a practice of self-care. And this is a way of taking care of yourself. And that's why you want to make a change to this current time habit that you have. And from there, with any change, any desire for change, any implementation of change, it often takes time and it often takes practice. So it's rare that something really sticks on the first try, and it takes that effort and that time to really work on it. It doesn't always work right away. There's kind of the growing pains and the trial and error that has to happen. It takes some experimentation to see what types of tools or routines really work well for you at the specific point in your life. So I always recommend having a sense of self-compassion and really working to build your sense of self-compassion with any change behavior, whether it's time related or otherwise. Offering yourself that sense of care, that sense of nurturing, that sense of we're human, we're not perfect, we're not machines. This isn't, going to work all the time. And it's important to me that I'm making these changes, that I'm trying hard, and it's okay that maybe it didn't work the first time, but I'm trying. I can see that I'm working hard. And being gentle and kind to ourselves, I think is one of the best things that we can do. Suppose there's also then using clocks to your advantage. So keeping a clock visible, especially if it's something to do with maybe in your workplace or maybe in a space of leisure, depending on what your desired change or your area of your life that you are looking at change. Keeping a clock visible, it helps to kind of externalize the responsibility of keeping track of time to the clock itself. And then your responsibility is kind of working with the clock to keep track of time in the way that you want to. And I always recommend that using a clock other than the clock on your phone or on your computer is kind of the best way to go, because it helps to minimize any potential distractions that might come up if you are checking the clock on your phone and you see a notification, and that then leads to your attention being pulled into that notification versus a clock on the wall that just tells you the time. Technology then is a big one in talking about time awareness. In some ways, it can be a time thief, which is a quote from one of my participants in one of my research studies, looking at how easily it feels that technology is just stealing time rather than feeling a sense of control over the time that's being spent in technology or with technology. It can often contribute to experiences of multitasking, breaking up our time into time confetti, because our attention is very easily pulled into technology. Can also make setting boundaries more difficult. If we think about boundaries between work time and leisure time or non-work time, having technology accessible in the way that it is means that we can often be working from anywhere at any time, and setting those clear boundaries then are really important to making sure that we're creating quality time. And a lot of apps are specifically designed to promote time blindness in the sense of wanting to maintain a user's attention. So social media platforms are probably most popular for this, where their purpose is to try to keep our attention and our focus away from how much time is passing as we're using the app. So with that, I say technology, and I think it is a really important tool and resource that we can be using. And it's about being really intentional about how we can invest time into using our technology to our advantage. And a lot of these tips do kind of take an extra time investment where we have to spend some time up front, really understanding our preferences, understanding what works well for us and what we want, what changes we want to see, creating systems or routines that are going to work for us. But then hopefully once we've established some of that, it is going to work in our favor moving forward. So using technology to your advantage, creating prep time systems. So in terms of planning a commute, I think using technology such as Google Maps can be really useful in that it accounts for kind of every step of the commute process. So it accounts for how much time it's typically going to take on the bus, as well as how much time it's going to take to walk from your current location to the bus stop, from the next bus stop to your destination, so on and so forth. So using technology to kind of break down that process and that time for you in terms of prepping to get somewhere on time. Creating prep time systems in terms of leaving the house, for example, breaking down the routine. So if I need to be to work by 8 a.m., what does it look like from the amount of time that it takes to commute if I'm going in person, the amount of time it takes to get ready, the amount of time it takes to maybe pack a lunch or get breakfast ready, or whatever else is involved in the morning routine. Really breaking down that prep time system into those different blocks, and understanding kind of how much time needs to go towards each of those blocks in order to then work towards that arrival time. Creating focus time systems then, in terms of periods where you want to, again, kind of remove the responsibility of keeping track of time and really be able to focus your attention on just whatever task or activity you're engaged in. So setting some timers before getting involved in the task, so that you can really focus on the task and not worry about how much time is passing. That again is going to take that step beforehand to really consider, okay, how much time do I want to dedicate to this activity or this task? How much time do I think it's maybe going to take? If it's maybe a leisure task like watching TV or scrolling on social media, it could be something where we say, I only want to spend so much time doing this activity, and that timer is then going to keep track of that time for you. So when the timer goes off, that can be your limit or the boundary that you set on completing or finishing that task or that activity. The Pomodoro technique is maybe something that some of you have heard. Using an app or timers to give yourself delegated focus time, where you have 25 minutes to work or to focus on something. The timer then goes off. You take a 5-minute break. The timer goes off at that 5 minutes, and then you go back into another 25-minute focus zone, and so on in those ways. So these are ways of trying to kind of remove the focus or the need to keep track of time, because the timer or the technology is doing it for you. Some other ways that we can use technology, minimizing distractions. So making sure to turn off any notifications, close on any unneeded tabs, and considering, are there any other environmental distractions that could be minimized in some way? Creating an environment that's going to support your focus. So that could be music, that could be nature sounds, or anything that helps to kind of support the focus rather than create a distraction. Noise canceling headphones could work well. Is there specific lighting that works well? Spending time curating our environment to make sure that it's kind of optimizing or supporting the task or the activity that we're trying to give our attention to. And then setting limitations on technology that sucks up your time. So if you find that you spend quite a bit of time on social media or quite a bit of time gaming or anything that is that time thief, as my participant said, where it's taking a lot of the time without you realizing that it is until afterwards. Using timers or using kind of delegated amounts of time that you can spend on each thing every day can help to kind of make sure that those boundaries are being set, and it's easier then to maybe adhere to them. And I know we're kind of coming up to time here. So I'll kind of make this very quick and then hopefully we can have a couple questions as we're finishing up. Allowing for quality non-work time. These are a couple other things that have come through in my research, which actually I think for the sake of time, I'll leave this here, and they'll be available for you in other slides, or in the slides after the presentation. But I will just say the reflective time journaling, where you are tracking your time and how you're spending it, and then reflecting and kind of journaling any thoughts or experiences that come up for you as you track your time, can be a really useful way of becoming more aware of your current time habits and helping to identify maybe some of the areas where you would like to focus on making intentional change. And then finally, just coming back to the self-compassion point and recognizing that any changes that we're trying to make, any progress, it's going to take time, it's going to take trial and error, take practice, and the best thing we can offer ourselves is kindness through that. Okay. So I think I will leave this here. If you're interested in kind of sharing what one of your biggest takeaways from today's webinar was, this is another Menti that we can use. And then Jen and Pauline, I know, do we have a minute or two here for a few questions?
Absolutely. Maybe if anyone has any questions, maybe related to your own personal experience or something you found useful or anything like that, or any of the points that Anna touched on, you can use the Q&A now. But I know personally I found that really interesting. I think it was so nice that you ended on the note of compassion, because I have ADHD as well as being autistic. So I think I grew up thinking that everyone else had time figured out, maybe, in a way that I didn't. So it kind of felt extremely heartwarming and important to kind of see that actually this isn't something that there has to be a degree of shame about whatsoever, and that we're all learning. You know, so I suppose we have 2 questions coming in, but other people can, you know, keep putting in questions or anything like that, and we will see what we get to. So one of the questions here is, I suppose, about what's the best way to manage our time and our forward plan in life. Life changes so often that we have no idea what might happen in the future, and you have plans for the future, but you have no idea if you'll get to the end destination. So I guess that's more of a long-term looking at planning time, really, isn't it? In terms of looking at reaching life goals and dealing with change as well, you know, which is something that I know so many in the autistic community struggle with, including myself. So if you have any words on that, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's such a thoughtful question. I suppose maybe one thought that I have in response to that is considering our sense of control, where we maybe don't have complete control right now over what it's going to look like in a year or 5 years, but we have control over what we're doing today, what we're doing tomorrow, and how those small steps or small routines and habits that we have today, the decisions that we're making now, can, within our control, contribute then to the direction that we want to be going in the future. And I would say kind of breaking it down as much as we can in that sense, to a sense of, I have control over right now. And what decision can I make right now? How can that feel aligned with maybe where I want to go, even though I can't necessarily completely control what that's going to look like in that long term. But if I take those steps by steps, that can maybe lead me in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lovely answer in a way, because it does come back to the base point, which is probably being kind to ourselves again, and recognizing what we can and can't control. So I really, really appreciated that. there's another question here, which is, what's the best way to fill a quiet spell at work? This is something I'd actually really interested as well, because you know, if you get a momentum going in work and you feel like you're really in the flow of things, and if there's a stop of productivity for whatever reason, maybe you're waiting for someone to get back to you and something like that, that shift can feel quite jarring, and it can almost feel like it's quite hard to get back in the zone. So is there any techniques or anything that you found particularly useful, you know, in dealing with a quiet moment in work?
Yeah, I suppose I have what I call kind of my like 5-minute method. And I don't know if it would be exactly useful for this, but I find it really useful in moments in work or in life where I just need to pause for a second and kind of recenter with myself. And so I'll set a timer for 5 minutes. It could be more, but typically I try to keep it just short like that, where I really just kind of focus on coming back and breathing and checking in with myself. If it is during a quiet spell or kind of a moment where I've paused momentum and I need to go back into momentum, it can be a moment to kind of get ready for that and set the intention of, okay, I'm, you know, gearing back up to start working again. So I suppose that intentional little chunk of time is one suggestion that I would have. And then another is if there is kind of that quiet spell during work, I like to keep kind of a non-urgent to-do list where it's not stuff that needs to get done or needs to get done quickly or at a certain time, but it's stuff that I find important. And so when I do have that quieter spell, rather than feeling like, okay, I just have to wait until something, you know, starts up again, I have kind of already done the work for myself, where I can go to that list and say, oh, okay, you know, here's something that I wanted to circle back to. And now I have a little bit of time to do that. So I still feel that that time is being used with purpose. It still has value. And it gives a sense of control over how I'm using that time.
That's really, really interesting, actually. Yeah, because it's advice that absolutely I can take on board 100%. So we might do one or two more questions if that's okay, if you have time.
Yeah.
You know. So another question has come in that says, I often get carried away doing tasks that I enjoy, but the time blindness makes me very inefficient, and I struggle with the negative impacts of time blindness. How do you begin making a schedule that's both realistic and healthy?
Yeah, I think that can be such a tricky thing, because as much as I think in general, as much as we would love to have a very clear sense of how long things are going to take and to be perfectly productive for every minute that we've allocated to something, we're human, and that just isn't how it works. And that's where I like to really think about energy management and energy awareness, and considering what I can do to kind of set myself up for success. So as much as it is kind of creating the right environment for me to get work done or to really focus on something that I care about, it's also kind of understanding my energy peaks and my energy dips. So considering, are there certain times of the day where I'm most focused, and I know that if I'm spending time doing something during that time of the day, I'm maybe most able to get things done, most able to kind of combat any distractions that come up, versus my energy dips, where those might be certain times of the day where I'm going to get distracted. It might be the most minuscule distraction, but because my attention and my energy is lower, it's much easier for me to just kind of flail around rather than really focus and get things done. So paying attention to, are there certain patterns in when energy dips and energy peaks are occurring, and how can we maybe use those patterns to our advantage? Or are there any signals that you can maybe notice in yourself when you are in an energy peak or in an energy dip. So is there a sense of tiredness that maybe indicates an energy dip? Is there a sense of excitement that indicates maybe an energy peak? And using that to kind of determine or help to create a schedule, because sometimes it is that moment by moment rather than planning what the next month schedule looks like. But maybe the energy doesn't actually align then with that routine.
That's, yeah, it is really, I suppose, about creating that level of balance. So another question we have that I think many of us can relate to is, in work, I personally become hyper-focused and I'm guilty of perfectionism. And I often end up working longer hours than I should, and I can't break away. I lose hours. Are there any good ways of striking a balance where you're not sacrificing the quality of your work?
Yeah, I suppose it could be a matter of setting some of those timers, and giving yourself even that 5-minute method check-in, where even if the timer goes off and you decide whether or not you want to continue working on something, it's at least a check-in or a pause to say, okay, is this enough? Do I pause now and come back to it tomorrow, versus no, actually I still have energy and I still want to keep going. And I suppose sometimes that can kind of break the flow, but because it's just a short chunk of time, sometimes it's easy enough to just pause. Yep, I'm okay to keep going. There's nothing else that immediately needs my attention. And then I can dive back into it, versus maybe pausing and saying, oh, okay, actually, I do need to pause now. There's something else that needs my attention, or I need to call it a day in order to make sure my energy is back again tomorrow.
So we might just do 2 more short ones and then we'll wrap up, if that's okay. I know we're not going to get to everyone's questions, which is unfortunate. But we have one here that says, I definitely get overwhelmed with so much choice of what I should or could be doing with my free time. In the end, I could end up doing nothing, and then I feel guilty for wasting my free time. I've had 2 weeks off from work and I feel very negative now for not using my time more wisely. Do you have any ideas of how I could stop this cycle, as I always feel like I go through this anytime I have time off?
Yeah, I really resonate with that. I find that a few things have been useful to me, and there's a few suggestions that I have from the time research. One, I suppose, is to sometimes it's pre-planning what that time off is going to look like, or at least having maybe a list of suggestions of what you might want to do with that time. So when it comes then to actually spending that time and being in that time off, it's not this overwhelming overchoice of having so many things to do. You already have kind of taken some time to prioritize. Here's maybe the top things that I'd really enjoy doing right now. And of course, that can always chop and change as you see fit, but it at least narrows down the initial decision making for you. I think also having very clear boundaries with work time and non-work time, to, rather than feeling like there's an ambiguous, maybe I'll get a little bit of work done because I don't know what else to do, or there's too many other choices, having a very clear, this is what I'm going to do in my non-work time, this is non-work time. And there isn't this sense of guilt or pressure to maybe I should be working instead. And then I suppose from the research, there's also a bit that's come out around, there's a research paper called Treating the Weekend Like a Vacation. So having a sense that that time is a treat to yourself, and doing anything that's going to feel enjoyable in the moment, anything that's fun, rather than feeling a sense of it has to be productive, or there's a to-do list, or there's a house to be cleaned. Taking a mentality or a mindset shift there, and just kind of going with whatever feels fun in the moment, and not putting a sense of it has to be quality time, or it has to be productive, or it has to be the best time ever. It can just be in the moment what's exciting. And then my final note on that is taking it in chunks. So the research has found that actually smaller vacations or smaller times off of work can sometimes be more enjoyable than really long periods off of work, because we like to have a sense of purpose, we like to have a sense of structure, and sometimes a long period can really be difficult to really link into a sense of purpose, link into a sense of structure. And it can also lead to feeling more stress or more pressure coming back to work, because it feels like we're behind on things, or there's a lot that we have to catch up on. And so I suppose being intentional in ways that we can about how much time we're taking off, and still absolutely taking time off. I think that is incredibly important, but being intentional about when we're taking it off, or how we're using a little bit of structure to kind of optimize the enjoyment of that experience.
Okay, absolutely. And I suppose on our last question, and maybe this is a nice note to end on, to bring it kind of back to base, is have you mastered this personally, or do you see this more as a work in progress for yourself, and that mastering isn't something that happens, that it's something that just clicks, or your own process, I suppose, with this? Is it a journey for you?
Absolutely a journey. I don't think that it will ever be master. I don't even know if it will ever be mastering. I think it's always a just experiencing and learning, because I think our time is constantly changing through different seasons in our lives, through different priorities that we're holding at different periods in our lives. And so even if there's, a small period of time where it feels like, okay, I'm in a good flow with how I'm spending my time, it feels really aligned, the choices I'm making feel good, that season could be very fleeting. And then something shifts, or something changes, or, a role at work changes, and all of a sudden I'm having to kind of create a new system or new rhythm for myself. So I absolutely think it's a constant work in progress. I don't think that there's any perfect way for any one of us to ever be spending our time. And it's more about a sense of time efficacy, a sense of I'm capable of using my time in a way that feels good for me. I'm capable of navigating changes when they do occur. It's maybe not going to be easy, but I have a sense of confidence in myself, and I have a sense of, intentionality and thoughtfulness that's going into the ways that I'm using my time and thinking about my time. So, and I have tools and resources that I'm using to feel in alignment as much as I can, knowing that being human, it's not always going to feel great. I'm not going to absolutely optimize my time all the time. It's not always going to be productive. But that's all part of the journey and the experience. And I think that's a really core piece of what I've learned through studying this and working with this.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing. Pauline, do you want to come in there? I see you have your hand raised.
I'm unmute myself. No, I just wanted to say thanks very much, Anna, and thanks for putting that together for the adult community. I suppose just my own reflections on it before we wrap up here, because when we spoke before, I said, like, I'm obsessed with time. I'm either running into it, running out of it, or letting it rule me. Collect watches, everything, it's healthy, has served me on many levels, but it has also done a disservice to me on many levels. And I find myself in those time waiting phases over and over, where I'm showing up too early, and then I'm beating myself up because I could have done something else with that time. But I just wanted to say I suppose on listening to you, it's really helped me kind of reframe time in a more wholesome, nourishing way. And maybe other people might relate to this in the community as well. How can it help us as autistic individuals to better self-advocate for our time in order to aid our self-advocacy? So it was a lovely, it was a lovely session, and thanks so much, and thanks to everybody for showing up and listening, and thanks to Jennifer for asking the questions as well on behalf of the community.
Absolutely, thank you so much, Anna. It's definitely helped me view time less as a nemesis and more like a tool that I can use. So it's definitely been very helpful, and thank you so much to everyone who asked questions and left comments and things. I'm sorry we couldn't get to them all. I really wish we could have, but we'll probably be here till midnight anyway. So I'm just going to put our emails into the chat now, just in case anyone wants to follow up, but Anna is going to share the slides with me after this, and I'll make sure everyone on the mailing list gets a copy of the slides in case anyone wants to go back on anything or follow any links. But otherwise, feel free to engage with the adult support groups at those emails. Reach out to us if you have any questions, if there's anything you think we can do for you in that instance. But it's an absolute privilege to have people like you, Anna, come in and talk to the community, and for us to be able to kind of share wisdom but also bounce off each other a bit too, which is really, really nice. So thank you so much. So we will wrap it up there, and I will just stop recording just to make sure that's definitely